Welcome to Theological Grazing.
Well, I'm going to keep going on this narcissism track as we talk about this problem of the radical self-centeredness and extreme narcissism of our age. And I really just want to talk about two books that I highly recommend that you read to understand narcissism in a way that I think it's a very helpful way, by reading stories that can help illuminate in some ways Sorry if you hear that in the background. I'm hitting some rumble strips as I come up to a stop. But I think that certain stories, narratives, can help put narcissism in a light where you can't as easily escape it. You can't as easily other it to make it, oh, this is someone else's problem. But it more easily is something that you can recognize in yourself. And the two stories that come to mind, and they're interestingly, they overlap in many ways. But one of them is Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. And the other is Notes from the Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Till We Have Faces is one of my favorite books that I've ever read. It's an absolute masterpiece. If you've not read it, I highly recommend it. Now, I will say that if you read it, you may read it the first time and think, I don't understand what I just read. That was my experience anyway. Maybe you are, beyond me in comprehension, and that's not in any way out of the question. It's pretty likely probably, but I do think that it is difficult in some ways. It's very allegorical, and I recommend multiple readings to really understand it. So last year, I had the opportunity to read it multiple times. I listened through it once on an audiobook. I had never listened to it before. I'd never read it. And once it was over, I thought, I have no idea what just happened. I have no idea what I just read. Then I read it again. And this time I really read it. And by the end of it, I thought, I know there's something here. I can't quite put my finger on exactly what this is saying, but I know that it is brilliant. I can feel it. I can sense it. I can see little glimpses of it. It was like, in a sense, when Orwell in the book is looking up from the river, and just for a moment she sees this castle of the gods, and then it's just that moment, and then she kind of suppresses that. It almost felt like that. Like I just had this glimpse. I don't think I was suppressing it, but I had a glimpse of what this was saying and doing, and it was masterful. It was beautiful, but I couldn't quite describe it. I couldn't quite express it. And then I read it a third time, and I thought, this is perhaps the greatest book I've ever read. And I don't know if it's for sure my favorite book ever, but it's in my top 5, guaranteed. And I would love to talk about it with anybody if you're ever interested. But just as a kind of very general overview, this book is from the first person. Actually, both the books I'm going to talk about are from the first person point of view, writing out a complaint of a kind. So in Till We Have Faces, Orwell is this queen of a place called Glome, and she is writing a complaint against the gods for what they have done in her life and what they have taken from her. And as she writes this kind of screed about her life and all that's happened to her, and about how horrible her life has been because of the gods and because of how horrible they've made her life, you get the sense that you're not getting the whole story. And this is the first part of the book. And then there's a second part of the book where it changes because Orual is confronted by the gods and she's changed in a sense. And so she begins to write from a different point of view. But when she begins writing, you hear this story of her and her favorite younger sister, Psyche, whom she loves. And Psyche is taken and married off to a god. And Orual is intensely jealous of Psyche. And she always calls it love, but her love is not actual love. It is possessive, right? It is an act of narcissism, where Psyche and really all those around her become purely an extension of her. And she can only relate to them as they are a part of her own self-conception and conception of the world. And the moment that Psyche or anybody else changes or says something that doesn't comport with her own view of things, she has to, in some sense, hate her or cut her off or and then there's this struggle inside of her where she hates her but loves her, and it's masterful in how it's written. But as you're reading it, I think that you get the sense that, oh, this isn't just Orual, but many of the things that she says and speaks of are things that are true of us, things that we experience, feelings that we experience, where from our point of view, all of these people are talking bad of us, looking down on us, thinking horribly of us. They're taking from us all the time. And then when seen from their perspective, we actually realize that, no, actually I've been the self-centered one. I've been the one that's been taking from them. And there's this great moment. This is a spoiler, by the way. If you haven't read it and you don't want to hear a spoiler, you might as well turn this off. But one of my favorite moments in the whole book, there's two moments that actually I really love. One of them is a moment when Orual is having a dream. And this is kind of the beginning of her change. She's having a dream, and in her dream, she sees her father, who at this point has died, this king that, was really kind of cruel to her. And she meets him, and he makes her dig down deep within this palace. And in digging down deep, she just keeps digging lower and lower until she comes to this room, and it's the same palace room, but it's deeper down. You get this sense that you are going deep into her own soul, her own mind, to see what is deep down in there. You also get a sense that you're going kind of further into the truth. You're getting closer to the truth. And she comes to this great hall, in the palace, and she looks in this mirror, and she says that she is the face of Ungit. Now, I should have described, if I had planned this out and I wasn't just driving to Green Bay and explaining these things, I would have started by explaining that Ungit is the god beyond the mountain, one of the gods that, the kind of primary god that Orual takes a complaint against. Ungit is this god who she thinks has ruined everything and destroyed everything about her life. That Ungit is one who just takes and takes and takes from your life and never gives and never helps and never does anything for you, but just takes. And Orual looks in the mirror and she sees Ungit. She sees the face of Ungit, this god that she thinks is just a taker. And the king says, "What do you see?" Or he says, "Who is Ungit?" She says, "I am Ungit." And she realizes that she is the one that takes and takes and takes. And she was always putting this on the gods, particularly Ungit, and putting this on others, as if everyone else was this way. Everyone else was against her. Everyone else was plotting against her. Everyone else hated her. Everyone else was taking from her, and nobody else understood. And what it turned out, and what she began to realize is that, no, this was her the whole time. She was the one. She was Ungit. All these nasty things that she thought of other people, it was actually only true of her. A highly narcissistic person, and I've said that we're all narcissists, and I think this is true to a point. But there's also those who are, they are deep in their narcissism. Well, a highly narcissistic person is somebody who, no matter what happens to them, no matter what happens, it is never their fault. It is never their responsibility. Right? They can twist everything to being somebody else's fault, having nothing to do with what they've done or choices that they've made. They're usually extremely paranoid. They think people are plotting against them. And because they are so consumed with themselves and can only think about themselves and how they come across and what they should say and when, and when someone else is talking, all they're thinking about is themselves and what they need to say, instead of listening to the other person and actually hearing them. When this is happening, oh man, I lost my train of thought. But this is the narcissistic personality, right? Everything, even other people and what they say and what they do, they can only see in light of themselves. So this is where I was going. Welcome to the podcast. This is how it works. This is basically an audio journal for me. So welcome to my mind. But a highly narcissistic person, they assume, because they can only think about themselves, because they're so consumed with thinking about themselves, that everyone else is always thinking about them as well. That when they make some kind of mistake and they're just unbelievably ashamed about it, they think that everybody else is talking about it and thinking about it all the time. They think that everybody else is as consumed with them as they are. And this is Orwell in Till We Have Faces. She sees herself as the kind of center of everybody's life. But that's not true. And she realizes that she had been putting on the gods and putting on Ungit, that God was this taker, this consuming thing, this thing that promised life but only ever took away and killed. And then she realized that no, that was actually her. This happens all the time. Today, I was talking to somebody several years ago, someone who had, begun on the road to Christ and was, interested in the faith, and then kind of suddenly just kind of left. And then I was speaking to them maybe a year after they had kind of, not fully walked away, but kind of made choices that made it harder to follow Christ. And I was talking to this person, and they started to describe God and how they felt God had turned his back on them and shut them out and wouldn't listen to them and didn't care for them and all of these things. And as they were describing it, I thought, and then I said to them, this just sounds like what you have done to God, right? You have stopped reading the Word. You have stopped praying. You've stopped going to church. You've stopped listening to God. You're doing all of these things. And it sounds like you're projecting onto God what you have done to him. And that's what we do. This is narcissism, right? Even God must just be as consumed with us as we are. So when I feel a certain way, that must be what God is like. When I act a certain way, that must be what God is like. Because in some deep sense, we think of ourselves as God. We think of ourselves as the model for God. This is why when God does things in our lives or in the lives of others that we don't like, we we assume that this is bad. We think, God, why are you doing this? You're doing something wrong. But that's only because the judgments that we're making are based upon us, as if we were the standard for God. This is narcissism. This is the radical narcissism at the heart of the modern virtual reality. I said there were 2 stories until we have faces. I'll have to save one for another time. I said I was going to talk about Notes from the Underground. I'll talk about that next, but for now, we'll just leave it there. I hope this is helpful. I hope it sheds a little bit of light. And if I'm not communicating things well, I hope that even just a little bit is getting through.
Well, that's all, folks. If you could help me out, rate and review this podcast, share it with a friend, go ahead and email me if you have any questions. We're out.